We had named the baby Erna, which is a very Old Norse name. As we were going through this process and still having hope that there was not something wrong, but the evidence just kept becoming more and more and more overwhelming. I don't need your approval or your judgment, but it's just my experience. And sometimes if you can just share that with somebody, the experience, it gives a little bit of understanding. It puts a face to something that is often just labeled as some really bad person doing something really bad.
I used to see the world in black and white, no exceptions, and I've learned that in order to have compassion, you have to be willing to open up to the idea that there is gray. And I know the best way to do that is by listening to stories. I had this conversation with a friend last year, and I decided to edit it down to a shorter chunk to tell the important parts of her story. Wherever you fall on this Roe versus Wade being overturned debate, I hope you will listen with an open heart and an open mind to understand that there are incredibly difficult decisions that do need to be made sometimes. It's always driven me absolutely bonkers when people think that someone would go through the suffering of being pregnant for so long just to decide one day, you know what?
Yeah, I'm done.
This is long enough.
Yeah, I don't really want this. This is not going to work for me. What we went through was from the first trimester to the second trimester. Okay. But it was very close going into the second trimester, which in most states in the United States is the cutoff for abortion. That's not done for an emergency use. So in many states in the United States, only procedures that are emergency procedures, in the case of the mother or the baby, are done in a hospital. So here's our story. Eric and I met in 2013 in Florida, in West Palm Beach. And in December of 2014, actually early January, we found out that we were pregnant. I'm really excited. It was going to be my first baby, and I was with the man that I loved, and I was super excited. I've always wanted to be a mom, so it was a big deal. I shared it with all my family. We did the ultrasounds. But in the early phases, super early, we had gone in to get the blood test done, and it was the first ultrasound to kind of check the fetus development or the embryo development. And it didn't seem like things were right. The development of the embryo, where I knew I would have been pregnant, did not show the same level of progress that it should be. It looked a little small. But the ultrasound technician didn't think too much about it, and then there was also the blood count initially on that tells you on your HCG level how pregnant are you, right? And that was also a little low for what they believed, and what I believed was the time that I had become pregnant. But we continued on. Things were developing fine. And then we went because I'm of advanced maternal age, I was over 35 years old. They have all these other additional tests that they do in the United States. And so those included multiple ultrasounds. I think I had, before the 4 months, 9,000. Yeah, it was probably 9 ultrasounds, both internally and at the point when it got to be large enough externally, ultrasounds. And in several of those phases, the embryo and the fetus just was not developing properly. I mean, it was developing. It was growing. I was gaining weight. The fetus was gaining weight. But it started to have some real definitive things on the second month. We were doing this check it's called the I don't remember the official name, but it's the neck fold. Yeah, it's a check to pretty much try to see if there's something wrong early on, and they do that by measuring this portion of skin right behind the neck, and if that is too thick, it can be tied to several different genetic issues: trisomy 13, trisomy 18, Down syndrome, and ours was showing that. And so we had to make a decision. We wanted this baby, so we were willing to do all of the tests that were needed to check this. It was too early to do a, what is it called? Remember? Amniocentesis. It was too early to do amnio, but they had another test that they could do, which was something similar, except they take the needle, and instead of putting it into the placenta, because there's not much of a placenta, nor is there much amniotic fluid, they can take the needle and they take out some tissue from the placental wall where it meets the uterus, and then they do a genetic sequence on that. The first test that we had to do was a blood test, and the blood test was to try and find fetal DNA in my blood that could then see if there was something wrong. But that test became inconclusive, and we waited for weeks and weeks and weeks, only for them to tell us that it was inconclusive. So time is marching on, right? There's certain things that you can do at this particular time, and then if you go past that, you can no longer do that test. Or you have to wait for this test, and this test will be more accurate. And so we did this, and by the time we got to this test where we did the uterine wall, I was almost 3 months pregnant. The cutoff for a elective abortion in Florida is right at the end of 3 months. Right? So it was ticking down where I wasn't going to be able to have a choice if something was going to be wrong with the baby. So we got this procedure done. It was awful. It was one of the most scary things ever, because it has a high rate, just like amniocentesis, where you could miscarry. There could be damage to the fetus if the needle were to hit. Eric, my husband, was there, and he's like nearly passed out because they're doing this via ultrasound, right? Because they can't see anything but via ultrasound. And then they jab this giant needle, and it's so close to the fetus.
Do you remember the pain?
It was terrible pain. It was terrible pain. And they do a local anesthetic to the stomach, but it doesn't change the fact that you're feeling this thing inside you that's just kind of jabbing down to grab just this little piece. I mean, and the needle is super thin. It's like a little bit thicker than a hair. So we waited, and then we had to wait, and it was going to be like another week for that test, right? But finally, the week that we had to make a decision, we finally got the information, and it was trisomy 13, and it was a girl. And we started to read about trisomy 13, and this is a really, Down syndrome is on the lower scale of genetic issues that the fetus has a chance of survival. But trisomy 13 doesn't. Their baby would be born, a baby would grow. My body would support the growth of the baby, but the brain would never develop. It would stop at the brain stem and would never get a lobe, a frontal lobe, side lobes. So therefore it would be incapable of eating, walking, breathing on its own. All of the brain function capabilities would not be there. Wow. So as soon as we found out what it was and what it would entail, again, my body would support the baby would grow, but it would never be conscious. But the heart was strong. I mean, the other bodily functions on the fetus were very strong. And that left us with this whole another level. And, unless you go through an abortion where you're actually having to not just take the pill, because a pill does something very similar as, the embryo is so small, it can be eliminated that way. But when it is towards the second trimester, the fetus is too big to do that. It needs more help. So we went to a counselor in an abortion clinic in Florida, because at that point, all of the doctors that I had worked with, they no longer can help you. You no longer talk to them. And they pretty much just shove you out the door and say, good luck with your life.
Not my problem anymore.
Yeah, because none of them can, I mean, they're trained to perform abortions for medical emergencies, but otherwise they don't mix. Prenatal care and abortions, they don't mix at all. And most abortions aren't even performed in a hospital. They're performed in a specific clinic, completely separate from the hospital, unless, of course, complications arise and the mother's health becomes a problem, and then she gets transferred into a hospital. So that was a little bit shocking, and it was a little bit disappointing that it was kind of just cast off. Yeah, it was, definitely off the beaten path. Every time we went, there was a table with Christians who were ready and willing to show me pictures of a bloodied, torn up fetus from probably like second semester, late first trimester, early second trimester. Because that's the only time when you'll be able to see anatomy of the fetus, is that late. And it was shocking. And there were other women in this clinic, but it was for a variety of different reasons, not just abortion. It was also for female reproductive care. So just getting a normal gynecological exam, people were there. We did a evaluation with one of the counselors to kind of talk about our situation while we were doing it, because we were so close, right? They had to pretty much expedite things, because within a few days of our booked appointment, we would no longer be able to do it there. We would have to transit to a different state. And, second trimester abortions are even harder. Usually you have to get some kind of medical board approval from the clinic to do a second trimester abortion. So none of these things happen where you can just walk into an abortion clinic in a late term second or third trimester, where you actually, just say, hey, I'm done. I don't want to have this baby anymore. It's ridiculous, and it's so small compared to the total number of abortions that happen. And the majority is something like 90% or more abortions happen in the first trimester, right? And in the first 10 weeks. So it's really, really early that the majority of abortions happen.
Did you kind of feel, once you knew something was wrong, did you kind of feel like kind of being released, like kind of saying goodbye to her and letting her go in a way?
There was enough time for that.
Yeah, I think we were in such a crunch trying to get every test that we could to verify that. I mean, I really felt early on, because I'm a believer in science, I think, more than faith. When the numbers came in on the HCG levels, I was like, oh, this doesn't seem right. I mean, I track my menstrual cycle, so I knew exactly when I got pregnant.
Right.
And this is a curve that's relatively standard, right? And my deviation on that was pretty big. So I think I knew at the beginning that something wasn't quite right. So it made me more willing to continue to do every test to verify that. But I kind of felt in the beginning, early stages, that something wasn't quite right. I didn't have any other physical effects to that. Because I believe that life is more than just a heartbeat, I did not feel there was a soul there. We had named the baby Erna, which is a very Old Norse name. As we were going through this process and still having hope that there was not something wrong, But the evidence just kept becoming more and more and more overwhelming. I didn't believe that we were taking her life. It was never really there.
Yeah, I understand that. How was it? How did you guys feel? How did you feel just knowing that you had to let her go and that the decision was kind of already...
horrible. It was horrible. I mean, it was something that I had wanted my whole life, and I was having it with a man that I fell in love with, and I had waited for him my whole life. So this was kind of a big deal. But I am not linked in a way with spiritualism that says that having that life be born with no life at all means zero life.
That is cruel.
It is cruel. It would have been, struggling because the brainstem was enough that says I need oxygen, I need to breathe. There's no understanding there because there's no other, higher level consciousness. But the fundamental part is like a fish, right? You take a fish out of water and it's flapping there. It needs to breathe. It wants to breathe. It wants to live, but it has no capability of doing it on its own. But it's no different than if my body had decided to miscarry that.
Exactly.
Right? Then it's okay. Then it seems to be genetic, right? Except in some states and in some instances in the past, right, where I would have been responsible if I had a miscarriage.
I heard, I don't remember which state it was, but this is just, this lady, her baby was dead, and she wanted to be able to see the body. But in order to deliver deliver her dead baby, to be able to see the body, she had to sign a paper saying that she had had an abortion.
The patriarchal viewpoint of women's reproductive care is ridiculous. We're 51% of the population, folks. Women are 51% of the population. And the only time that men or society cares is our reproductive years. Too young and I can't reproduce, you don't care. Oh, poor little girl. She's going to starve to death. No worries. She's not able to reproduce anyways. But those reproductive years, 16, 35, that's when you care.
If you want to listen to the full conversation, you can find that here. On this channel, I want to talk to people whose stories matter. Stories that can make the world a better place and teach us compassion and love. I hope that you'll stick around and join this community. Thank you, and hugs!